There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes, not from working hard, but from being seen as less than, not by strangers, not by rivals, by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. I know that exhaustion intimately. My name is Daniel. I'm 27 years old. I own my home. I built my career from the ground up, starting at a diner at 15 years old, with raw hands and a determination that nobody taught me. I had to find it myself. And I want to tell you the story of how my own family tried to take everything I built, how they almost got away with it, and how in the end, they handed me exactly what I needed to make sure they never could again. But to really understand what happened, you have to go back, way back. Growing up, love in my house came with fine print. Every meal my parents cooked, every ride they gave us, every small thing they did, it was never really free. It was logged, mentally catalogued. And at some point down the line, usually months later, sometimes years, they'd pull it out like a crumpled receipt and remind you of exactly what you owed them. As a kid, I didn't have the vocabulary for what that was. As an adult, I recognize it immediately. Transactional parenting. The kind that teaches a child that even being cared for is something you have to earn, and eventually pay back with interest. It leaves a mark. Trust me on that. My parents weren't struggling. They both had decent jobs. Money wasn't the issue. The issue was where that money went, and more specifically, who it went to. My brother Ryan is 3 years younger than me, and from the moment he entered this world, everything in our household tilted in his direction. Private soccer training, expensive camps, top-shelf gear. Whatever Ryan wanted, Ryan got, and my parents never hesitated, never questioned, never seemed to notice the cost. It was almost impressive, honestly, the speed at which they'd say yes to him. For me, the answer was almost always a variation of the same two things. Either, you don't need that, or get a job and buy it yourself. So I did. At 15, while Ryan was spending his weekends playing in tournaments and hanging out with friends, I was bussing tables at a local diner, hauling trays, scrubbing down counters, counting tips at the end of a shift like they were precious. It wasn't glamorous. My hands smelled like dish soap and grease on a good day. But that job gave me something my parents never had any intention of giving me: my own money and the independence that came with it. That job led to another, then another. By the time I graduated high school, I had savings. Not enough to retire on, obviously, but enough. Enough to pay for community college without asking my parents for a single cent. I remember my dad making some offhand comment about how I thought I was better than everyone else because I didn't need their help. I laughed it off at the time. I should have recognized that comment for what it was: a preview. College is where the gap between me and my family stopped being something I could politely ignore. While I was juggling 2 part-time jobs alongside a full course load, Ryan was apparently on a journey of self-discovery, which meant, in practical terms, dropping out after 1 semester and cycling through a series of jobs he'd quit whenever he didn't, quote, vibe with the management. Every time, my parents had an explanation ready. He's still figuring things out. He has so much potential. He's just not like you, Daniel. That last line was said like it was a compliment to him. I'm still not sure if they realized what it implied about me. The pattern was consistent. Anything I achieved got a polite nod, maybe a brief acknowledgement, and then the conversation moved on. But if Ryan did the bare minimum, showed up to something, completed anything, it was a family celebration, a phone call, a group dinner, the works. I stopped expecting praise a long time ago. What I didn't expect was what came next. When I was 24, I landed a solid tech job. It wasn't flashy at first. I wasn't some overnight success. I just kept showing up, kept learning, kept saying yes to the hard assignments that other people avoided. And it worked. Within a year, I was making enough money to start thinking about something I'd barely let myself dream about before. A house. I didn't tell my parents. I already knew how they were, and I didn't want the noise. So I quietly started looking. Every open house I walked into felt surreal, like I was an imposter wearing someone else's life. But slowly, with every visit, it started to feel possible, then real, then mine. The day I closed on that house, my hands were shaking. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't some glossy showpiece, but every brick of it represented a decision I'd made, a sacrifice I'd chosen, a night I'd stayed late instead of going home. It was mine in a way that nothing had ever been mine before. I invited my parents and Ryan to dinner as a surprise. I wanted to share it with them. I thought, genuinely thought, that maybe this would be the moment. Maybe this was big enough for them to just be proud. That was my first mistake. The moment they stepped inside, I saw it on my mother's face. She wasn't happy for me. She was calculating. Her eyes swept across the living room slowly, like she was appraising the place. My dad made a joke about me secretly winning the lottery. Ryan barely said a word, just walked around the space like he was mentally measuring it. The only genuine warmth came from my aunt, who'd come along and kept saying how impressed she was, how proud she was of me. But then we sat down to eat, and that's when the comments started. "It's nice," my mother said, in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. "But don't you think it's a bit much for someone your age?" Ryan chimed in without missing a beat. "Yeah, you probably could have helped out with other things instead of splurging on this." I put my fork down slowly. I asked what other things. And my mother looked at me like I was supposed to already know. "Your brother's been talking about going back to school," she said. "You know how expensive that is. We thought maybe, well, you have this big house now. You could have chipped in a little to help him get a head start." It hit me like a slap. Not once, not a single time, had any of them asked if I needed help with the down payment, the furniture, the bills, the years of sacrifice that got me here. But now that I had something visible, something they could point to, it had already been mentally reallocated, before the dishes were even cleared. I kept my voice as steady as I could. I told them I'd worked for this, that I hadn't taken anything from them, that I had no obligation to fund Ryan's choices. The air went cold. My dad muttered something about family helping family. Ryan looked at me like I'd personally betrayed him. I ended the dinner early. As they filed out, my mother hugged me, the tight, brief kind that isn't really affection, and whispered in my ear, "Don't be selfish, Daniel. We'll talk about this again." I thought it would blow over. I was catastrophically wrong. Over the following weeks, the comments began bleeding into every phone call. My mother would ring and say things like, "Ryan's been looking at programs, but we just can't make it work without some help. It's such a shame when people in the family have the means to help and just don't." My dad kept referencing everything they'd done for me growing up, which was almost funny considering how little financial support they'd actually provided, as if the act of raising a child was a debt to be collected on demand. And then one Sunday afternoon, Ryan sent me a text. "We need to talk. Come by." I went. I thought maybe he wanted to clear the air, maybe even apologize. Instead, I walked in to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of them, college brochures, tuition breakdowns, and, this is the part that made me laugh out loud in pure disbelief, a payment schedule, a proposal for exactly how much I could reasonably contribute to Ryan's education over the next 4 years, broken into installments. They had made a payment plan for me, for my brother's tuition. I laughed, not a polite, nervous laugh, a real one, because it was so breathtakingly absurd that my brain didn't know what else to do with it. My mother shot me a sharp look. "This isn't a joke, Daniel. This is his future." And Ryan, with absolutely zero shame, said, "I mean, it's not like you don't have the money. You bought a whole house. Why should you get to have all that while I'm stuck here?" Something in me snapped that day. I stood up. I told them clearly, calmly, that I wasn't giving a single cent, and I walked out. I assumed they'd be furious for a while. Maybe we'd stop talking for a few weeks. Normal family fallout. I didn't think they'd actually lawyer up. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. From a lawyer. I read it once, then again. Then a third time, because I was certain I was misunderstanding something. My parents were suing me. The claim stated that I had willfully deprived a dependent family member of necessary opportunities, the dependent being Ryan, a 24-year-old grown man with functioning limbs and no diagnosed disability, who had dropped out of college voluntarily and quit multiple jobs because of vibes. They were framing my refusal to fund his second attempt at higher education as active deprivation, as harm. The settlement amount they were demanding was almost identical to the tuition figure they'd shown me at the kitchen table. It also referenced emotional damages Ryan had suffered, and I want you to really hear this, because I had flaunted my success in his face. My house that I paid for, was evidence of flaunting. I sat at my dining table and stared at that letter until my coffee went completely cold. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I'd experienced before. My mother switched between guilt and fury on a daily rotation. One day, tears. Daniel, is a little generosity really worth tearing this family apart? The next day, cold. Your brother is devastated. He feels like you want him to fail. She would sometimes just cry on the phone, not say anything, just breathe and cry, waiting for me to break. Ryan was running his own campaign on social media. Vague posts, sad emojis, quotes about family loyalty. His friends and various relatives who didn't know the full story flooded the comments with sympathy. I wasn't named, but I didn't have to be. Everyone knew. And my parents were quietly, efficiently, poisoning the well with extended family. At a cousin's birthday, my aunt pulled me aside and said she wished Ryan and I could just work things out. She said my parents had mentioned I'd refused to help him after coming into all this money. No context, no history, just the edited version. At my grandmother's Sunday lunch, I overheard my dad telling a neighbor that I'd gotten too big for my boots and forgotten where I came from. I was being erased. 15 years of independence, of sacrifice, of building something from literally nothing. None of it counted. The only thing that mattered to them was that I wasn't bending. And then Ryan showed up at my house. Unannounced, no knock, just the doorbell over and over until I opened it. He stood there with this smug half smile, like he'd rehearsed what he was about to say. You know you're going to lose, right? Mum and Dad have the lawyer and the family on their side. It'll be easier if you just pay now and save yourself the embarrassment. We stood on my front porch. I looked at him, and I said quietly, "You're not entitled to my money, Ryan. You've had chance after chance and thrown everyone away. This is on you." That's when he said it. The line that embedded itself in my memory like a splinter. You only got here because you had it easier than me. Mum and Dad were harder on me. I deserve a fair shot. Easier. He thought my life had been easier. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I said, "If you think I had it easy, you weren't paying attention." I went inside. I locked the door. Things escalated after that. My parents stopped calling me directly and started routing messages through relatives. Voicemails from aunts. "Sweetheart, your mum says this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe if you sent your brother a little something to get started, we could all move on." From uncles. "Daniel, your father's blood pressure isn't good. This stress isn't helping." Each one carefully calibrated. Each one designed to wear me down through guilt, through family loyalty, through the accumulated weight of obligation. I hired a lawyer. I stopped sleeping properly. I started zoning out at work. My boss noticed. My reputation for reliability, something I'd spent years building, was starting to crack at the edges. I'd stare at my own ceiling at night wondering, what if somehow they win? What if they actually find a way to take this house? That thought, that specific fear, was when I understood what this had really always been about. And then I got a voicemail from my realtor. She sounded concerned. She said she'd received a strange inquiry about my property. Someone asking whether it might be available for purchase or rental soon, suggesting the current occupant might not be staying much longer. She hadn't given me a name. She didn't need to. When I called her back, she confirmed it. The inquiry had come from my mother. She'd called posing as a family friend, casually, conversationally, and had hinted that I might not be able to keep the property, and that it would be a shame for it to go to strangers when a family member could make good use of it. A family member. My chest tightened so severely I had to sit down. They weren't just trying to extract money from me. They were already positioning themselves to take the house itself. They'd filed a lawsuit claiming I owed them, and they were simultaneously signaling to the real estate market that my home might soon be available for Ryan. I thought about that first dinner, my mother's eyes scanning the rooms, Ryan walking around like he was measuring the space, the comment about it being a bit much for someone my age. It had never been about tuition. It had always been about the house. That realization broke something in me, and it built something in its place. I went quiet, completely, deliberately quiet. I stopped answering their calls. I told my lawyer to handle every single communication, no matter how small. I pulled my credit report. I locked down every financial account I had. I installed a security system, and in the stillness that followed, in the space I'd created by refusing to engage, I started building something they didn't see coming. Because here's what I understood. If I fought them loudly, they'd spin it. They'd paint me as aggressive, as cold, as the ungrateful son who turned on his family. But if I was quiet, if I let them keep talking, keep planning, keep celebrating a victory they hadn't actually won, they'd build the case against themselves. And they did. At work, my boss called me in one afternoon. I braced for a difficult conversation. Instead, he closed the door and said he could see I was dealing with something personal, but that he believed in my work, and that if I could focus, there was a high-visibility project with my name on it that could lead to a promotion. I threw myself into it completely. Long hours, meticulous execution. It was the healthiest form of escape I've ever found. And it worked. The project succeeded. The promotion came through, and with it, a meaningful pay raise that made my financial position considerably more secure. Meanwhile, my lawyer was quietly gathering evidence. Ryan's employment history, the parade of short-lived jobs, each abandoned by choice. His previous college attempt, one semester, voluntary withdrawal. Messages from my parents to their own friends that inadvertently revealed how much they'd enabled him, how deliberately they'd kept him dependent. And then I hired a private investigator. I wasn't interested in anything invasive. I just wanted truth. And what came back 2 weeks later was a folder that I read slowly, carefully, taking notes. Ryan's supposedly private social media accounts told a different story than the one being presented in court. He was traveling, buying electronics, test driving cars. Not the picture of a desperate young man being cruelly denied opportunity by his heartless brother. The PI also uncovered something older, a property dispute years ago, where my parents had pressured my late aunt into selling them a piece of land for a fraction of its actual value. A rift nobody in the family talked about anymore. But it was documented, and it told me this wasn't new behavior. This was a pattern. Then came the email. I was leaving a client meeting when my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. The subject line read, "Discovery request, opposing counsel error." Their lawyer had accidentally copied my attorney on an internal email chain. Buried halfway down the thread was a message from my mother to their legal team. I'll give you her exact words, because they deserve to be heard in full. "We need to make sure Daniel's house is included in any settlement. Ryan has already been in touch with a realtor friend who can list it as soon as it's signed over. This is the cleanest way to ensure he gets a fresh start." There it was, in writing, time-stamped, irrefutable. The lawsuit was never about education. It was never about opportunity or fairness or family. It was a legal mechanism designed to transfer my house, the thing I had worked my entire adult life to obtain, into Ryan's hands so he could sell it and walk away with the money. That's what I was worth to them, a transaction. My lawyer and I prepared carefully for the pre-trial conference. No emotion, no speeches, just facts. Presented in the right order, at the right moment, in front of the right people. When we walked into that conference room, my parents were already seated, Ryan between them with that familiar self-satisfied lean. My mother gave me the smile she uses when she thinks she has the upper hand. My dad looked at the table. Ryan was practically sprawled in his chair. My lawyer slid a binder across the table. Complete financial documentation of my independence since age 15. Employment records, tax returns, tuition receipts I'd paid myself. The paper trail of someone who had built everything without a safety net. Then he flipped to the flagged page. The email. My mother's face went white. Not pale, white. My dad's jaw tightened. Ryan sat forward, trying to read the page upside down, his confidence visibly faltering for the first time. And then my lawyer pressed play on his laptop. Ryan's voice filled the conference room. The recording made in a public setting, legally obtained. He was talking to a friend at a bar. No, man. Mom and Dad are making it happen. Once it's mine, I'll sell the place and be set for years. 5 seconds of silence. The mediator cleared his throat. My lawyer, without raising his voice even slightly, said, "Given these facts, we believe the court will not only dismiss the case, but will find grounds for a countersuit, covering damages, legal fees, and reputational harm." Their lawyer leaned toward my parents and whispered urgently. My mother shook her head, eyes now locked on me with something I'd never seen from her before. Fear. Ryan muttered something to my dad. My dad silenced him with a look. They asked to step out. I sat with my hands folded on the table and waited. 10 minutes. Not a long time in most contexts. An eternity in that room. When they came back, their lawyer's voice was carefully flat. We're prepared to withdraw the lawsuit, with each party covering their own legal fees. My lawyer didn't even glance at me. That's unacceptable. We have documented evidence of malicious intent and will proceed with our countersuit unless we receive a written apology, a public retraction of all statements made against my client, and full reimbursement of his legal costs. Ryan's head snapped toward my parents. We're not. Yes, my mother cut him off. We are. By the end of that week, the apology letter was in my inbox. It was clumsy, stiff. The language of people who are sorry they got caught, not sorry for what they did. But it was signed. It was real. And the reimbursement check cleared shortly after. I kept the apology letter, not because I needed it for closure, not because it gave me anything I hadn't already given myself, but because it was proof, concrete, undeniable proof, that there had been a moment where they were forced to admit, in writing, that they were wrong. I sent copies to every relative who had iced me out over the past year. No message attached, no explanation, just the documents. The phone calls started within days. Not from my parents, from the aunts, the cousins, the uncles, who had believed the version of events carefully crafted to make me look like the villain. Awkward check-ins, fumbling apologies. People who had decided which side to be on without ever asking for my side. I didn't answer most of them, because here's what I understood by then. The point of all of this was never to win people back. It was to ensure that they understood, with no remaining ambiguity, that I didn't need their approval to survive, and that turning on me had consequences. The family group chat I'd been quietly removed from months earlier apparently became a battleground. Screenshots of the apology letter, clips of the recording, and every time someone tried to defend my parents, another relative dropped another piece of evidence. My parents stopped showing up to gatherings, not because they weren't invited, because they couldn't bear the questions. My mother, who had built her entire social identity around being the generous, long-suffering matriarch, started avoiding calls from her own siblings. My dad became quieter, grayer somehow. Ryan took the hardest fall. The friends he'd bragged to, the ones he'd told about cashing in on his rich brother, about being set for years, started keeping their distance. Without the settlement, without the house, without the story he'd been telling himself, there was nothing to show. I heard he moved out for a while, then quietly came back when bills proved too much without a support system he'd never bothered building on his own. The last time I saw him at a family event, he couldn't meet my eyes. Here's what I want you to take from all of this. I didn't win because I was smarter than them, though the evidence they accidentally handed me certainly helped. I didn't win because I had better lawyers, though mine was excellent. I didn't even win because I was right. Being right, in families like mine, has never been enough. I won because I stopped letting them define the terms of the fight. For years they had set the rules. Ryan's comfort was the priority. My achievements were debts to be collected. My success belonged to the family, meaning to them, by some unspoken law I'd supposedly agreed to at birth. And for years, even when I pushed back, I was still playing inside their framework, defending myself in their language, trying to make them see me clearly. That dinner, the night I invited them into my home, hoping for pride, and got a payment plan instead, was the last time I played by their rules. After that, I documented everything. I focused on my work. I built my finances. I let them talk, let them plan, let them celebrate a victory that was never coming. And when the moment came, not a moment I forced, but one they created for me with their own carelessness, I was ready. I sit on my porch sometimes in the evenings. The neighborhood is quiet at that hour, and I think about that 15-year-old kid scrubbing dishes at a diner, counting tips like they were treasure, going home exhausted to a house where nothing he did was ever quite enough. I think about what that kid would think, seeing this porch, this house, this life. I think he'd feel something he didn't get to feel very often back then. Safe. My home will never have their name on it. It never did.